The lovely spirit-filled song drifted up from the elderberry patch as the first rays of pink lit the sky. It was first come, first served when the elderberries were ripening. What had been a plate-sized umbrella of tiny white blossoms was now a lovely disc of tiny berries. Most of them were still green and hard, but each day a few more plumped up juicy and ever-darkening purple. Matilda, Jillian, Clara, Molly, Larissa, Gabby, and Phyllis were out early every morning. They were careful to pick only the right berries one by one and place them in their bowls. The berries were so tiny, they would fall through the slats of the baskets. Phyllis had made up the song weeks ago and by now had taught it to the group. It was a spontaneous overflow of joy, and one morning she had just started singing it as if it had bubbled up from someplace deep inside her. Phyllis loved it when they all sang as a choir. "Oh, you girls make it sound so lovely," she smiled. "My stammer is not so lovely," she said shyly. "I think you sound like an angel." They all started and looked up to see Fred hopping up, all grins. "That's the song I heard you singing when I first laid eyes on you, darling," Fred said as he kissed the back of her hand. Phyllis blushed and batted her eyelashes at him. "So, when are you two planning the wedding?" Matilda asked with a tease. "Actually, that's what I came fixing to discuss," Fred said in a more serious tone. "I don't want to step on any toes, and I don't want for Bluebell to have a conniption if we set our knot tying afore hers," he said, rubbing his chin whiskers. Mother Skunk pondered over what he had said and tried to work through his meaning. "So, you don't want to upset Bluebell by having your wedding first?" Mother Skunk asked Fred. Fred nodded. "You do have a point," Jillian joined in. "Bluebell hasn't seemed content and really hasn't been making plans." Molly nodded in agreement. "Let me talk to her," Molly offered. "Clara, why don't the two of us pay her a visit this morning?" Molly said, turning to Clara as she emptied her tiny berry bowl into the larger bucket they had brought. Phyllis smiled up at Fred. That was very thoughtful of you to think of Bluebell," she said, then added, "but I would like to plan our wedding sooner than later." "You're darn tootin'," Fred said with enthusiasm as he hopped on home. "Well, that question certainly opened a bag of worms," Mother Skunk chuckled to herself. "I think we're done picking berries for today," Mother Skunk said out loud. "Always leave some on top for the birds and a few to fall to the earth to sprout for next year," she reminded the group. Everyone emptied their bowls into the central bucket. Even though each berry was small, they had picked so many the bucket was nearly full. Mother Skunk was eyeing the bucket and thinking it was going to be heavy to haul home. As if on cue, Albert and Benjamin walked up. They were moving at a brisk pace, and their lively conversation was punctuated with little outbursts of laughter. They were both in high spirits. "We came to carry the bucket home," Albert called over to the group. Mother Skunk clapped her approval. "Splendid! I was just thinking it was going to be heavy for us girls." She smiled back at them. "Ah, you could do it," Albert grinned as he took one side of the handle and Benjamin taking the other. "We set up drying trays at our place," Benjamin announced to the group. "We still have a lot of empty space to spread them out." Phyllis took Mother Skunk's arm and whispered, I think I'll head on home, Matilda, if you don't need me." "Of course, go ahead," she answered. Gabby watched as her mother hopped toward home. "These days she forgets I'm even here," she laughed. "Listen, Blue, I'm going home with you," she said with a determined nod of her head, nose twitching. Then she turned to Benjamin. You need to marry Bluebell right away so Mama can marry Fred. They're tired of waiting on you, she blurted out. At first, Benjamin blinked in stunned silence with a blank expression on his face. Everyone froze, waiting for his response. Then he burst into laughter. Oh, well said, he chuckled. We never considered how our wedding plans were affecting others, but you're right. I can see how Fred and Phyllis would feel obligated to wait till after our wedding, since our engagement was announced first, he said in a more thoughtful tone. Molly spoke up. Clara and I have been planning to talk to Bluebell about it this morning. Clara nodded in agreement. Well, tell you what, why don't I discuss it with Bluebell first? Benjamin smiled at the girls. I've been wanting to set a date, but Bluebell has not been in a hurry. Maybe this will nudge her into a decision, he said. When they arrived at Mother Skunk's front door, the girls all scampered inside, leaving Albert and Benjamin to carry the elderberries the rest of the way to Benjamin's house. Once they were alone, Albert asked Benjamin, Is everything still okay with you and Bluebell? I expected her to set a wedding date right after the blessings party. Benjamin was silent for a bit and sighed. You know, I think so. But every time I bring up the wedding date, she seems nervous and changes the subject. To be honest, it has me a little worried, Benjamin confided. Albert nodded and thought on this for a while. Perhaps it's not the date setting, but the big wedding she's nervous about. I think everyone expects a huge event, and Bluebell has never been one to like being the center of attention. Albert knew his sister quite well, and he could imagine her being nervous at the thought of the whole forest staring at her. You know, I think you're right. Perhaps a huge wedding is really not what she wants. Thank you, Albert, Benjamin said as he reached his blue front door. I can take it from here, Benjamin said, swinging the bucket in the door. See you later. He grinned as Albert waved and scampered back home. Bluebell heard the front door open and scampered over. She had been lining drying trays up along the back wall. Oh my, they picked a lot of berries today. I hope I have enough trays, she said, peeking into the bucket. Well, let's pour 'em out and see, Benjamin said as he carried the bucket inside. The two busied themselves smoothing out the tiny purple berries. So what do you do with these anyway? Benjamin asked as he stood back surveying the trays covering the floor. We make elderberry syrup, Bluebell said, eyes sparkling. It is so delicious. We just dry the berries first so they last the winter. It's easy to make. Half a cup of dried berries simmers in 4 cups of water till only 2 cups of water are left. I like to add 5 cloves and a cinnamon stick. Then I pour the liquid through a strainer and put the berries in the compost, she explained as she took off her apron. So you just drink it like that? Benjamin asked. Oh no, not yet. Then you add 2 cups of honey. That makes the syrup part, she grinned. It's delicious, and we use it to stay well. If you ever feel a sore throat coming on, just start sipping elderberry syrup. It'll fix you right up, she said with a smile. I remember one night, Charlie woke me up in the middle of the night. He was wiggling my toes saying, Bluebell, I need elderberry syrup right now. She laughed at the memory. You've been taking care of your brothers and sisters for a long time, Benjamin said thoughtfully. Then he took a deep breath and continued. You know, every time I bring up the wedding date, you change the subject. I'm beginning to worry you may not want a family of your own. As he expressed his fear, tears began to well up in his eyes. Oh no, darling, Bluebell said, rushing over to him, throwing her arms around him to give him a hug. It's not that, she said, shaking her head. Then what? Benjamin asked, searching her face. Stage fright, she said, wringing her hands. The thought of standing in the middle of the great glen with everyone staring at me has me terrified, she admitted. And I don't want to disappoint anyone by having a tiny wedding and not inviting everyone. She sighed. I just can't figure out what to do, she said as she plopped down on the kitchen chair, put her elbows on the table, and held her hand up with her hands on her forehead. So, Albert was right, Benjamin said more to himself than her. Albert? Bluebell said, looking up from her hands. We talk, you know, Benjamin said. Bluebell nodded. Albert said you might not want to be the center of attention, he explained. Well, Albert knows me pretty well. Bluebell smiled shyly and raised her eyebrows. Okay, let me think on it. I'm sure there's a solution, Benjamin said as he stood behind her and rubbed her shoulders. You don't need to worry about it anymore. I will fix everything. He sat down in the kitchen chair next to her and held her hand. All I want you to do is get Clara and Molly and start planning the details. You need to enjoy making your dress and planning the party. He smiled at her. Bluebell started to tear up. It just seems like an impossible problem, she said with a heavy sigh. You trust me? Benjamin searched her face. Of course, Bluebell nodded. Then no tears. It'll be fine. Benjamin leaned over and kissed her on the forehead. Now, let's go down to your mom's and have lunch with the family. Then you can start making decorations and dresses and all the other fun things with your sisters, okay? Bluebell stood up and took a deep breath and nodded. Okay, she said, and they headed out the door. Meanwhile, Phyllis was hopping home to the walnut tree. She kept hearing Matilda's question in her mind. So, when are you two planning the wedding? She was replaying the conversation over and over in her memory. Oh dear, she mumbled to herself, her nose twitching nervously. By the time she reached her yellow front door, she had herself worked up into a tizzy. Fred was standing at the kitchen table pouring hot water into a cup for tea. Mint tea? He asked her. Phyllis wrung her hands nervously. No, actually, I think I need chamomile, she stammered. Fred looked up to study her more closely. Now what's got you all tied up in knots, sugar cake? He asked her with his toothy grin. He went to the cupboard and pulled out a bag of dried chamomile flowers. You do look like you need some calming down. Phyllis wiggled her ears as she sat down. Well, you see, I keep thinking about the conversation at the elderberry patch. Fred handed her the teacup, now steeping the tiny white flowers with their bright yellow centers. Thank you, Phyllis said as she took the cup, held it up, and let the warm steam rise on her face. Taking a deep, long inhale of its fragrance, she said softly, I'm actually, well, I'm kind of, well. Fred sat down next to her. It's okay, you can tell me anything, he said. Tears welled up in her eyes as she looked down at the teacup. Don't you want to set a wedding date? Fred asked her, worried. Oh, yes, Phyllis nodded. I just wish it was yesterday. Fred cocked his head to one side. Okay, now I'm confused. Well, you know, I tend to be a bit nervous, she started. Fred nodded. So, you see, standing up in the great glen with everyone staring at me, well, I think I'd faint, she blurted out, looking up at him with eyes that said, help me. Normally, Fred was all fun and jokes, but he understood this was a very real problem for her. If I told you I would make it all okay, Would you believe me?" he said as he kissed her forehead. "Let me talk to Benjamin. I have an idea." Phyllis tried to take a deep breath and nodded. "Good," he said, standing up. "I'll make us lunch, then I'll head over to Benjamin's. You just start planning that dream wedding," he grinned. As promised, Fred put on his straw hat and headed over to Benjamin's house after lunch. He was knocking on their front door and getting no response. "I guess they ain't here," he said to himself and sat down to think. Then he heard Bluebell's voice coming down the path. He looked up to see Bluebell chatting merrily, holding Benjamin's arm as they walked home. Fred stood up smiling and waved. "Howdy, y'all!" he called out to them. "Oh, hi, Fred," Bluebell called to him. "Did you come to get a share of the elderberries? I was going to divide them up after they dried, but you can have them now if you like," she said as they reached the front door. "Huh? Oh, no. I came a-calling to have a talk with Benjamin. Us men folks have something to discuss," he said, tipping his hat to Bluebell. "Walk with me?" Fred asked Benjamin. "Sure," Benjamin nodded. "I'll be back in a little bit," he said to Bluebell. She patted his hand and then went in. "So, what do you want to discuss?" Benjamin asked as they started walking together. "So, you see, my sweet Phyllis is afeard to stand up in the great glen with everyone staring at her. She says she'll faint, and I do see that as a possibility." Benjamin stopped in his tracks. "Her too?" He shook his head. "I finally got Bluebell to tell me why she hasn't set a wedding date. Same thing. Stage fright." Benjamin threw up his hands in frustration. Fred nodded, pondering the situation they both found themselves in. "So, here's my idea," Fred said, crossing his arms on his chest. "What if'ns we have a double wedding? Then Phyllis and Bluebell will have each other. They won't be standing there all alone." Fred raised an eyebrow and looked at Benjamin. "That's it! Brilliant!" Benjamin lit up with a huge grin. "A double wedding!" "So you like it?" Fred asked, grinning. "Yes, I do." Benjamin nodded and started walking back toward home. "Let me tell Bluebell I'll get back to you." Fred was all grins. "Then I'll mosey on home and talk to Phyllis," he said and turned toward home. Benjamin burst through the front door calling, "Bluebell, problem solved. You'll love it." Bluebell was putting the tea kettle back on the fire. Benjamin grabbed her hand and led her to the kitchen. "Sit down," he said with gusto. "It's brilliant." "Oh, what's brilliant?" Bluebell laughed. Benjamin was too excited to sit still and paced back and forth as he talked. "So, Fred talked to Phyllis, and turns out she's just as nervous about standing up in the Great Glen with everyone watching as you are. He had this brilliant idea. Why don't we plan a double wedding? That way, you and Phyllis can be together to support each other. And I was thinking, you should have all your sisters and Clara stand up with you as backup support." Benjamin took a deep breath and looked at Bluebell for her reaction. She just sat there in silence for a moment, then slowly began nodding her head. "Yes, I think that will work," she said slowly. "I'm trying to imagine it in my mind and see how it feels," she said, still sitting quietly. Benjamin was getting nervous and started pacing again. Then at last Bluebell smiled. "I think you've done it," she said with a burst of giggles. "I can imagine it, and I think it will be perfect," she grinned. Benjamin exhaled in relief. "Then we can set a wedding date?" he asked hesitantly. Bluebell nodded. "I can't wait to tell Mother," she said with a happy clap. "Then don't, let's go," Benjamin said, waving toward the door. Back at the walnut tree, Fred burst into the kitchen to find it empty. "Now where could she have gotten to?" he said out loud to himself. "Oh, I know, the garden," He grinned to himself and went back out to trot down to the tomatoes. As he got closer, he heard her thin, sweet voice singing. Fred smiled to himself as he hid behind a bush to listen. "Just like the first time I ever saw you, darling," he said softly to himself.
Love, love, love divine, in the garden in the morning, when the dew is on the vine. There is nowhere quite as sweet, and the world is mine. In the garden in the morning, when the dew is on the vine, then our hearts will sing while the bees keep time. Yes, our hearts will sing for sweet summertime. Love, love, love divine, in the garden in the morning, when the dew is on the vine. Love, love, love divine, and the berries are sweet, and the world is mine. When the sun starts to rise, and there's pink in the skies, the birds start to sing, and the bees take to wing. It's what I like best when I rise from my rest, is the garden in the morning. When the sun starts to rise, there's nowhere on earth that I'd rather be than in the garden in the morning, with a sweet melody.
Phyllis was snipping ripe tomatoes off the vines and stacking them carefully in her basket, pulling weeds as she went. Fred stepped out from his hiding place and walked up to her. "That has to be the prettiest song I ever did hear," he said, smiling. "Oh, well, I like it," she smiled back shyly. Did you talk to Benjamin?" Phyllis asked, setting down her basket. Fred nodded. "How about this? We have a double wedding. You and Bluebell can stand up together. And I think you should ask all your girlfriends, you know, Matilda, Mrs. Beaver, and Auntie Bee, to stand up with you too. You can just make a party of it. What do you think?" He grinned. Was Benjamin okay with it? I don't want to barge in on their event," she asked, worried. "Oh, yeah, I forgot to mention. Bluebell's got stage fright too. So Benjamin said it was, to quote him, brilliant," Fred said proudly. "Well, then so do I." Phyllis smiled and hopped up and down with excitement. "It is brilliant. You are brilliant," she said as she threw her arms around his neck and planted a big kiss on him.
Chapter 48, In the Garden. Discussion and questions. Communication. The failure of Bluebell and Phyllis to communicate their fears in honesty have led to misunderstandings and emotional stress in the rest of the family. Fred and Benjamin feel unable to set their wedding dates and are both beginning to doubt their partner's desire to actually marry them. The longer the lack of communication continues, the more negative assumptions both men make, which is hurtful. Question 1. How would the situation have improved if Bluebell and Phyllis had openly expressed their fears right from the start? Question 2. How does open communication lead to problem resolution? Question 3. Is there someone you need to be open with and communicate your true feelings?
I am the composer and performer for all the music in this video. Both audio recordings and the printed scores are available on mybestfriendsliveinthe.woods.com. I will provide the link below. The painted illustrations are also my creation. Prints are available on mybestfriendsliveinthe.woods.com. This is a novel. The chapters are meant to be heard in the order in which they were written. And while each chapter can stand alone, they do build as new characters are introduced and past events are referred to. Please be sure to like, share, and subscribe. The chapters are numbered, so if you're just joining us, be sure to go back and watch from chapter 1.
In a dream, in a trance, my spirit flies to the pink horizon of a forest, where fairies say, "Come and play," and the animals say, "There's a better way," an enchanted land of love.